Oop, yeah.
Hello, and we are live. This is Brenton Lengel, and I'm joined by Bobby B of the 5x5 podcast. Or do we want to consider this? Do you want to introduce it and then just cut off this for your podcast portion of this?
Yeah, sure. I'll probably leave it in. But if you're listening to this on my audio, because I'm a terrible editor and I forgot to edit out Brenton's introduction, I'm Bob of the 5x5 podcast. This week joined by a repeated special guest star and friend of the show, Brenton Lengel.
Awesome. I'm a friend of someone's show. This is exciting.
You are. It's an extremely small startup show, so don't be too proud.
Don't tell people that. Let them think it's really big.
It's a huge show.
All the cool kids listen to it. We're just like Chapo Trap House.
Exactly, except not in New York. And
yeah. Well, you're not in New York, but
no. Oh right, yeah. Shoot, you are. You beat me on that one, man.
Yeah, Harlem.
If you'd like me to be in New York, however, you can leave Diamond Press Latinum at my George Soros Patreon.
That sounds amazing. And the worst thing about working for George Soros, I should add, is the Antifa super soldier serum. He makes you pay for that, and then reimburses you, and you've got to keep your goddamn receipts. And I hate that shit. And he wants me to freaking fax it to him. Like,
do you get the headaches too?
From the super soldier serum?
Yeah.
No, but it does very strange things to my stool and my genitals.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hey, they liked it in Tijuana, so what are you gonna do?
Exactly. Oh my God! Like, there's got to be like, I bet you there's like some alt-right guy watching this right now, being like, "Oh my God, it's true."
This is on the Q subreddit right now, dude.
That's the thing, though. Like, if there were Antifa super soldier serum, these side effects, I can only imagine what those would be.
Well, that's what Soylent was. It was the beta test.
Oh, okay.
That's why you can't find it anymore.
There's a great podcast. Don't go listen to that one. Listen to this one. But there's a great podcast on the Dollop about like the history of Soylent and how it was developed and like the crazy man behind it.
I mean, you'd have to be a nut job because it's made of people, or it's named after something that's made of people.
He purposefully named it after something made of people. This is the guy who created it. He literally so he calculated, he was like an engineer, which is the worst. My brother's an engineer, and what he did was he wanted to like try to calculate how to live as cheaply as possible and still get the calories he needed for the lowest dollar amount. So he tried to live initially off of Little Caesars cheese pizzas for like a month. And I think after the first week he was like, I want to die.
Yeah, that's disgusting. It's not even good pizza.
Oh my God.
It's not even good pizza. Oh, as a native New Yorker, it's heresy to even like walk into a Little Caesars pizzeria.
Oh my God, yeah. The thing, I would occasionally. I have good memories of Little Caesars because the pool that I used to lifeguard at and coach the swim team that I ran for like 4 years. We would occasionally have Little Caesars at that pool, and I'd be so freaking hungry. It was like Ninja Turtles pizza.
Oh Jesus!
Only because I was super hungry and I'd been at that damn pool staring at the wall for ages.
So I'll tell you a funny story that people can laugh about before we get into the actual serious discussion we're going to talk about.
The serious, depressing discussion. We're doing the chaser.
Yeah. I
guess before which defeats the purpose of the chaser.
It kind of does. I'll tell a joke at the end.
Yeah, good.
But my family is divided between an Irish Catholic side of the family and a very devout Italian Catholic side of the family. And my father, who's also Bob, his mother, my grandmother, came to visit us one year, and she found ragu in the cupboard, like the jarred ragu. So we all come down for coffee in the morning, milk and cereal for me because I was like 4. But my grandmother's standing there, and she's like, apparently she's Don Corleone in this scenario every time I tell this story. But she's like, Robert, my son, talking to my dad, come here and give your mother a hug. So he goes over to give him a hug, and she just rears back and slaps the taste out of his mouth. She pulls out the ragu that she found in our cupboard, and she goes, what the fuck is this shit? Ragu? smash everywhere all over the floor.
He should have gotten Prego.
Yeah, he should have gotten Prego or Newman's, I guess. Yeah, but
Newman's is great because if you buy Newman's, a large portion of the profits actually go to the Hole in the Wall Gang camps, which is a charity for children who are dying. Yeah, it's a real thing.
I was about to make a Butch Cassidy joke, and now I feel bad.
Oh, yeah. No, it's the Hole in the Wall Gang camps. It's for children who are dying. So that they can go to camp and still like have all of like the end of life care that they need.
Well, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's like as far as supporting a capitalist product, that's probably one of the better ones you can buy.
Which you have to do inevitably.
Yeah, inevitably. But like, yeah, I know that because I used to be in a fraternity that Paul Newman was also in, and we used to raise money for them in particular.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I was a frat boy.
Yeah,
many years ago.
Bro, that's awesome.
My first play ever is called Trojan Men, take off on the Sartre's Trojan Women, and it's about a fraternity, about like what it's really like to be in a fraternity. And one of these days, it will get produced. It's a damn good play, though. It's also like it was written before all this woke stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it might not have aged too well. I was a little edgy.
I was watching Code Monkeys with the frat boy on that one, and it hasn't aged well either.
I mean, mine aged okay, but it's there was a lot about like just male. I don't think a lot of like freaking like feminist academics realize this.
Yeah.
But male culture is really toxic. No.
Well, that's something that we'll be talking about a little bit because. I really have to censor myself because of my experiences and my real gallows humor. I've had a couple really weird experiences since I got out of the U.S. military.
Yeah, and that's sort of what we're talking about. And well, why don't you, since this is your podcast, and I'll let you introduce the topic, and then we'll kind of talk around it.
So, for the last few weeks, you guys have probably been familiar with the protests that have been going on in every major city in the country. I would like to pause just for a moment and recognize the world historic achievement of the Portland protesters actually getting the federal stormtroopers out of their city. I talked about this on my episode last week. Those gentlemen in those multicam uniforms, in my opinion, have no honor and were enforcing a blatantly unconstitutional anti-humanitarian edict from a failed game show host president. So great job to people in Portland. But there was a gentleman, Garret Foster.
Failed game show host with Swiss cheese brain because it's been eaten up by Alzheimer's, and we all know it.
Who also dodged the draft. And
Bone spurs.
Bone spurs.
We shouldn't say that. People will think we're a liberal podcast if we talk about bone spurs too much, but that fucking sucks.
It does. It's a really shitty excuse. But there was a gentleman named Garret Foster who was attending a protest in solidarity with a BLM movement, who was murdered by a gentleman who we'll name later, but I don't feel like naming him right now. When I found out that both of the men were veterans and that the murderer was from my beloved U.S. Army, I thought it would be very interesting to have a chat with somebody who wasn't a veteran or active duty about the culture that produced this guy, what people's perceptions of the U.S. military are, maybe what we as veterans can do to fix that a little bit, or what civilians can do to understand the veteran and the active military experience a little bit better. And Brenton is somebody who does content on YouTube, really good content. We'll have to do a crossover. I'll brush up on my Schopenhauer for your Buddhism series at some point.
I'm really looking forward to that. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna have to read Schopenhauer again. So like, I'll fucking call you and be depressed. But
because it's Schopenhauer.
It is Schopenhauer, but I thought it would be very interesting because Brenton, also a very far left guy, and the left, in my opinion, in my experience, kind of has a blind spot a little bit when it comes to us vets and active duty troops. So I thought this would be a very interesting conversation to have, and maybe I can learn something, maybe Brenton can learn something. Hopefully everyone in the audience learns something and enjoys the content.
Absolutely. There are two things, though, that I should make clear beforehand.
Absolutely.
One, I don't actually consider myself to be part of the left.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, no, it's fine, because I'm kind of cheating and lying about that. There's a video I did about it, which is on my channel. It's a response to the Distributist, who's like a Catholic reactionary, and
of course, he has a made-up name.
And a made-up name, and there's a picture of him like with a gun and like a hat, like and it's drawn in like a pseudo anime style, because of course. But I don't consider myself to be on the left, even though 9 times out of 10 I'm going to agree with the left and the far left. I tend to call myself an anarchist, because what I don't want to have happen is I don't want to have team mentality like worm its way into my head, and suddenly I'm saying things I don't believe, not because because I'm part of the left and we have to maintain the party line. Right. And so I normally just identify as an anarchist, and you don't categorize me, bro. But like, it is fair. I will also say it is fair to consider me part of the left, just because that's who I agree with the most at the moment. I just will throw the left under a bus in a second if I think that they're wrong on something.
So you're more Camus than Sartre or de Beauvoir.
Definitely more Camus.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing is that while I am in fact a civilian and have never been in the military, I do come from a military family, so I am a military brat. My father was a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. And he was actually a flight surgeon and was stationed. I was born in Naples, Italy, and he was stationed there. Like, that was when I was born, and he was one of the people that was sent in when that first act of terrorism, that bomb that went off on the military base in Lebanon and killed like 208 Marines. Like, my dad was one of the first people sent in there.
Oh, wow, no kidding! Thank your dad for his service for me. Next time you talk to him, please. Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't mean to erase that.
No. You didn't erase it. You just didn't know about it. But that said, I did not go into the military for a number of obvious reasons. Someone tells me to run up a hill, I'm going to say, what's at the top of the hill? So, and my family, for the most part, was against me joining the military until I said I was going to be a professional actor. And then they're like, go join the military, go join the Navy. You don't even have to be an officer. You can just enlist. It's going to be great. And I'm just like,
I just choked on cigar smoke when you said that.
So I have some experience with the military and with military culture, but it's from afar. So I'm kind of in the middle. I'm astride both worlds.
Right. Which is a good thing, because it puts you a little bit more materially in touch with the culture that we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. Now, I may not know all the terminology and stuff like that. So if I say something stupid, don't have somebody in the thing be like, "Oh, that guy's lying." No, it's just I genuinely don't know. I'm not putting myself forth as an expert, and if I have to say it, like, I'm way more civilian than military.
Yeah. I was in the military for about 8.5 years, and somebody in the comments will probably call me out on saying something wrong. So don't feel bad about that.
Perfect. Yeah. The comments are horrible. You're all pigs.
Yeah. I totally read every one of them. No, I don't.
You read them obsessively.
Yes, and I'll respond to everything. But yeah, so what I think the good way to start this off would be when you saw this event happen where Garret Foster was murdered, what were your first thoughts about that?
I mean, I heard about it before I saw it, and this kind of thing has been happening. This is so very different than Occupy, because when Occupy was in the streets, nobody died, and we've seen a gradual escalation. And what's freaky about it was I remember when I was very into Occupy and posting about it, like with my old pre-web 2.0 forum community and stuff, where I had originally come in as somebody on the right and then came back as somebody on the far left. So like a lot of my former friends hated me. I remember one of the things that the guys would come after me about would be like, "How dare you block streets? Just wait until someone gets angry and runs you over." And like, you could tell from the post, they were so horny to murder protesters for simply inconveniencing them, and not just inconveniencing them, but drawing their attention to something they didn't want to pay attention to, they didn't want to think about. So, no murders by car happened at Occupy. No. Not in any of the cities that Occupy was in. and things got a little crazy, but like protesters weren't armed. A lot of us, went through the more standard thing of just getting our asses kicked by frickin' stormtroopers. And then like Unite the Right happened, and Heather Heyer was murdered. And she was around the same age as my wife, if I'm not mistaken. I think she's had like brown hair, and like it really affected both me and my brother. His wife was around her age too, and we were just like, this is really fucked up. But that was a big watershed moment for the alt-right. It was like, oh my God, someone died. And now things are getting so crazy that death is becoming more commonplace, and these car attacks are becoming more commonplace. There were multiple car attacks on the Chaz. There was a car attack on a closed street in Seattle. So when this attack happened, and the fact that the guy was armed, like, I wasn't surprised he was armed. Yeah. 2, I wasn't surprised he died as a result of being armed, because if you're open carrying, well, guess what? You're now a target. And 3, I didn't really know the circumstances. I'd heard he was a Boogaloo boy, and some of them, from what I've heard, are great, and some of them are out of their goddamn minds.
Yeah.
So, I wasn't quite sure what to think, and it took me a little while to sort of piece the stuff together. And then more as this was pieced together, I was like, oh, this guy's a freaking hero.
Yeah. It's trippy like that, because when I first saw a photo of it on my news feed, I assumed that he had been the shooter because of the way he was dressed and tacked out and stuff. And I've got to think, we're going to get obviously more into detail as we keep going with the conversation, but coming from being in the military and actually learning how to wear that tactical gear and how to carry a firearm efficiently, how to actually engage targets and all that good stuff that they teach you in the Army, that you'll probably almost never use, and you'll spend most of your career mopping things. But it really makes me annoyed when I see people wearing that, because one, it's kind of bad optics in my opinion for the protests. If you're going to go out and protest, take care of yourself, be safe. If you know they're going to deploy tear gas, maybe think about getting a gas mask. It's a good idea. They work really, really well. You can get one for about $100. They're on Amazon. I'm telling you, I'm giving you explicit advice right now. It's not illegal, but when you show up with firearms, one, it gives the failed right-wing media a lot of content, because they'll praise people on their side for showing up with firearms, and they will demonize people on the side of humanity for showing up with firearms, and they'll do it.
The left-wing media will do the same thing.
They'll do absolutely the same thing. Well, they're owned by like the same corporate kind of
they've got the same interests
ultimately. And the other thing is, you're not going to shoot it out with the police. That's not going to happen. That's a power fantasy that is not going to happen. If you do open fire on the police, I guarantee you they are much better at shooting people than you are. And if you do, that gives people like the failed game show host we were talking about a minute ago an excuse to really clamp down with the police state on these protests. That being said, Garret Foster was open carrying legally in Texas, an AK-style rifle. He was not pointing his firearm at the gentleman who purposely drove his car into the middle of the crowd. And he was murdered by being gunned down in the street by the guy who drove in. And what was his name? I'm sorry. I purposely try not to remember.
His name is Daniel Perry.
Daniel Perry, who apparently was an active duty sergeant in the U.S. Army. Mm-hmm. And Garret Foster was a former Air Force airman. Mechanic. I don't know what his rank was, so I can't give it to him, but he was an airman of some sort. And, both of these guys came into the same military structure, and then one of them wound up being on the side of the Angels, in this case at least, and the other one wound up driving his car into the middle of a crowd and shooting him. And that's kind of what gave me the impetus to do this, that what is it in the military culture that we're experiencing and the vet culture that we're experiencing that causes people to one, fetishize this kind of behavior, like you were talking about, like they're so horny for these car murders. I'm in a bunch of vet groups on Facebook. A lot of them wind up being really far right. They're full of people who are otherwise maybe decent or may have good resources for a vet, but they have these far right views, and you can see them just being horny for this violence. And I wonder where that comes from. And then, these guys were both in the same military, different branches, and one of them gunned the other one down. And then I wonder what makes us so separate that somebody would have the violent impulse to drive his car into the middle of a crowd and shoot somebody who's basically his brother in uniform. I think something that bears talking about that a lot of people miss now is that we've been at war since 2001. That's almost 20 years now. We've been in Afghanistan, Iraq since 2003, various other countries. We're in several different countries in Africa. It's almost impossible to know how many countries that the global war on terrorism is being waged in. One, because political leadership ain't too open with that. And the other one is that it's a different kind of war. It's not a frontline war. But because of certain policy decisions that we've made over the last 40 years, the American people, and civilians specifically, are completely materially disattached from the 20 years of brutal warfare that we've been going through. And that kind of builds a bit of an insular vet culture and an insular army culture, because whereas if you look at Vietnam, from your perspective, you're an artist. If you look at the art that was coming out of the Vietnam War, it was almost universally like protest music. It was stuff that people could relate to. The movies that were coming out were all kind of veiled anti-war movies. In the case of MASH, or explicitly anti-war movies. There's like one pro-Vietnam movie that was made during Vietnam, and it was that awful John Wayne Green Beret movie. Terrible movie. Don't watch it, kids. But now, if you look at what's been going on from Global War on Terror, we have an all-volunteer force that's about 1% of the U.S. population. Most people in America probably don't even know an active soldier. And you can see the art that's been going on since the beginning of the Global War on Terror. It's like Waiting for the World to Change is like one of my least favorite songs, because it's just like, you can just wait and we're materially disattached and we can wait for the world to change, which is terrible advice in general, but it also is completely materially disattached from 20 years of war that we've been going through. And we're building a culture now in the military that's completely materially disattached from civilians. And again, that's one reason why I kind of wanted to have this conversation. And I wonder what we can do to fix that. And I wonder how much of that contributed to Garret Foster's murder. Because if you're a vet, you get familiar with a lot of vet brands, because there's a whole separate culture industry that's devoted to us. There's T-shirt companies that you might have seen. You might have seen Grunt Style. I'll name it explicitly. There's Awesome Shit My Drill Sergeant Said, which is another T-shirt brand. There's a million of them. There's the Black Rifle Coffee Company, which is actually a fairly okay company. They're just irreverent. But there's this whole culture industry about being a tough vet. And a lot of that lends itself really well to right-wing rhetoric. Because another thing about being in the military is that you're kind of materially disattached yourself from civilian society. Because your paycheck's always guaranteed. Your housing's always guaranteed. Your healthcare is always guaranteed. And you're working a lot.
So basically, except for the last part, you're living in socialism.
Oh, you're in a socialist organization, point blank and period. The means of production are completely owned by the state, and you're working towards a collective benefit. The only thing that Marx wouldn't really like about it is how hierarchical it is, but that's kind of necessary for a military. If you're curious about how that would work, or how the military works, there's a great book that you can read. It's very dry. It's called On War by a guy named Karl von Clausewitz. I think everyone should actually read that book before they die. It is the philosophical work of Western warfare. What Sun Tzu is to the East, On War is to the West. Clausewitz takes war and military principles and applies basically early 1800s physics and science to it, and develops a serious methodology.
I like that in the East, the thing Sun Tzu is the art of war, and in America is like on war.
Well, Clausewitz was a Prussian. He was
oh god.
He was like 10 years old when he went in as like a drummer boy, and he wound up being the head of the first Kriegsschule. He fought Napoleon. He was a badass. Wow.
Well, the Prussians, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, one of the reasons the Americans were able to win, like the American Revolution, was the Prussians. There was a very famously incredibly gay Prussian general who came in. Steuben. Yeah, Baron von Steuben, who came in like on a freaking dog sled. Basically, like, when he showed up at Valley Forge, he might as well have like showed up like, I think, in like a fur coat with freaking glitter coming off.
Did. Well, it's funny that you learn about Baron von Steuben like the first day you're in the army.
Really?
Yeah, they give you you show up at basic training, you go to your reception battalion where they give you all your uniforms and stuff. And then when you go to actual basic training, they give you a little thing called a blue book. And they call it a blue book because von Steuben what his big contribution was to the Revolutionary Army was that he taught them how to use the bayonet drill. Because you can be and this is something that applies today too. You can be a very tough woodsman. You can know how to shoot, but you're still not a soldier because you don't have doctrine, you don't have unit cohesion. So what he gave them was unit cohesion and doctrine, and taught them how to use bayonets, which is something that the British had over them. And it's very, very important when you have a gun that you can only shoot like 3 times in a minute.
That you need a bayonet.
Yeah, so you still learn about him, and that's one of the things about the modern U.S. military is that it is steeped in history and tradition. If you have a friend who's in the military, ask them about some of the heraldry on their uniform. They're going to be really annoyed with you because it's drilled into us 24/7, and we start to hate it. I still sing. I was in the 3rd Infantry Division. I still sing the Marne song in my sleep sometimes.
I have no idea what that is, but now I know. So I can if I've got a friend who's a soldier, I can troll him by asking about the heraldry.
Yeah, you can ask them about the heraldry or the army song or something like that, and they'll hate you immediately. Or their regimental song, like I still know the Ordnance song, which was I think written by Irving Berlin. There's a lot of weird history to it.
But now, I should add, by the way, just to jump into this really quickly, I don't want to derail things too much, but one of the things that I have a friend who's a vet, and he was actually, it looks like he was given partial PTSD by the military. He was never in combat, but from what I hear, also combat is kind of a release, and it's more like the daily grind of military life that can really give somebody PTSD if they have the right personality for it.
Dude.
Now he was in the Navy, and he was also an MP. And one of the things that happened to him during his training was like he was really just dying to call home and talk to his mother. Yeah. And they sent him into a room and gave him like a phone card. They had to dial in the phone and dial in this number to call her. Yeah. And in the middle, like they sent him into the room and they're like, you have exactly this much time to call home and to talk to your family and stuff. And then they shut off the lights. Yeah. So he's sitting there like in the dark, desperately trying to like key in this number so he can, and he was unable to do it from what I understand. But yeah, I remember when he came out of the military, it was one of the things that actually made him into an anarchist, because he didn't trust any authority whatsoever once he came out. And he also like, I remembered like he would talk about this stuff and I'd be like, dude, you didn't see combat. What the hell are you talking about? But then I remember he got a letter from the military, like, and it was just like a letter saying like, okay, here's your final paycheck. This is your bank account. This is the thing. Bye. And I remember watching him get this letter and take it out of the mailbox in his apartment building, and his hand like shook uncontrollably, and he dropped the letter, and I had to like pick it up and open it for him. So, I mean, does that sound like something that happens to a lot, or did he happen to have like a particularly psychopathic like trainer? He
definitely had a really rough time in training. I had 2 people in my basic training threaten to kill themselves.
Oh, jeez.
One of them was legitimate, and the other guy actually just wanted to go home, which was really annoying. And there's a very dark story that I could tell about that, because we had to have these guys on suicide watch. They had to sit in a room with the lights on, no shoelaces or anything that they could kill themselves with, and one other person watching them. And I actually came in and I had to do a shift change with the guy who was watching him before. The guy was so angry that this guy was faking suicide, which he legitimately was faking suicide.
Yeah.
That he had taken a razor out of his shaver, and he's like, do it for an hour. And I was like, oh my god, like, that was like one of my first messed up experiences. In my basic training, I got 3 phone calls. You had 3. The U.S. Army basic training has 3 phases. It's red, white, and blue phase. Imagine that, right? But the red phase is where your stereotypical guy is just screaming at you and you're doing a lot of push-ups and you're learning how to put your uniform on. White phase is basically learning how to shoot guns. And then blue phase is putting everything together for a field op. And you got a phone call at the end of each one of those phases. And then when you go to your job training, or unless you're an infantryman, which the gentleman who murdered Garret Foster was, when you go to your job training, you'll get your cell phone for certain hours. I hear now that they actually let kids have their cell phones in basic training, which in the vet culture is actually kind of like a big deal, because there's a weird thing that happens too where I went
through this, so you therefore must go through this?
Yeah, there's a fetishization of toughness, which is, I think, necessary for the military because you're in a very tough job. no matter what job you're doing in the military. You're most days you're waking up at 5 and you're going to work till like 1700, 5 o'clock at the earliest, which is not something that they're going to tell you in the recruiting commercials. So you do have to be tough to go through it. You do have to be tough to get through the training because they're giving you military training to be a tough guy. They'll make you tough. Not many men are born brave, but many become so through training and experience is a great quote from, I believe that's from Clausewitz. And there's a fetishization of that I think lends itself very well to far-right movements. And that is a kind of a problem in the military right now, because we have people who are targeted for recruitment by extremely far-right movements. But to answer your question about your friend, yeah, I think he did have kind of a psychopathic drill instructor. And I know soldiers who had toxic leadership, bad leadership, or just were worked to death in the Army. Because if you're good at something, you'll keep doing it over and over again with very little prospect for advancement. And there's a huge issue with insomnia in the U.S. Army right now. In the Navy that you were talking about specifically, they're understaffed because they're not meeting recruitment, and they've been running their crews way too much. In 2018, there were 3 instances of Navy ships colliding with other ships because, and one of them was because basically the guys had been up for like 26 hours at the helm, which is insane. But yeah, you can get PTSD just from the training. I had a couple people quit and they claimed PTSD. I know a couple people who got PTSD from just being stateside and had serious mental health issues after the military. I've been overseas a couple times in the military myself. I do get disability for post-traumatic issues. There's no shame, in my opinion, in going for help for that.
Yeah.
But
no, you should always go. There's a huge. What's so weird is there's this huge, and this isn't just the military, but just our culture in general.
Yeah.
There's this huge fear of taking advantage of mental health services because suddenly that means that like you're insane and like you're broken somehow. It's the idea of like if somebody broke their freaking leg, they're like, oh, I don't want to go to a doctor because that means I broke my leg. Like, just get your damn leg fixed. And the weird thing is that everybody, if you have the money and the network to actually do therapy, everybody does it. I did not learn that until I went into therapy myself because I was having a lot of problems, and I was finally like sucked it up and contacted somebody who a friend had put me in touch with, and I found out like frickin' 50% of New York City is in therapy.
Well, yeah, you're living in New York.
Well, yeah, you definitely need that. But like, not just New York City, but just like there is absolutely no shame in seeking out help, particularly for something like talk therapy, because you know people are like, oh, well, I should be able to handle that on my own or with my friends and family. No, because like it's nice to have somebody who's not your friend that is a professional that is paid to listen to you.
Yeah,
like it's a totally different perspective that nobody gets if they don't have a therapist.
Yeah, and you know, we're talking a lot about kind of the negatives of the military. My normal co-host who couldn't be with me this week, Rocco, he'll tell you this. I'll tell you this from my own personal experience: is that the U.S. Army does actually have mental health services, and if you're able to take advantage of it, if you keep at it, you'll eventually get there. Are absolutely amazing. I talked to people after I got back from Afghanistan. I talked to people when I was stationed in the Pentagon, and they want you to get the help. But there's a problem in the culture where you fetishize toughness so much that that if you're the guy who's seeking out that help, that you're weak or you're a problem soldier. Which the guy who murdered Garret Foster, in my opinion, probably actually a problem soldier just from the things that I've seen about him. And it's a very weird thing, and I'm trying to make sense of it because on the one hand, I, as much of a lefty as I am, I still do have a really big patriotic flag boner for America, and as much of a lefty as I am, I still do have fond feelings for aspects of the Army, even though some of my experience was toxic. And I don't think that I think that some people it's not right for. I think the gentleman that murdered Garret Foster was definitely not right for. And I think there's a culture both in the Army and around the Army and in our politics that led to this. Because if you look at the politics that we're dealing with right now in America. You have one party, which is the Republican Party, that since 2001 has been fetishizing a soldier.
Yep.
They've been saying we're for the troops. They always have some weird vet bro come up on their podium, and he's always wearing one of those awful T-shirts, the "fuck ISIS" in Arabic letters T-shirts, or the "I'm a major league door kicker," or somebody who uses the term sheepdog unironically. Have you encountered that ever? Do you know
So
that?
the whole sheep, yes, I have encountered the sheepdog thing, and like the whole sheep that actually comes from. If you check out Robert Evans' podcast, Behind the Bastards, he does a deep dive on this freaking asshole who really popularized that whole sheepdog thing.
Yeah.
The guy he wrote a book called On Killing, and he promotes himself as like, the premier expert in killology, which is not a thing. He just made that up. It's like if I'm like I'm the world expert in writology, the science of writing. Please pay me thousands and thousands of dollars to go around like the world and teach everyone to write good.
The emotional things he talks about are true in that book, but I'll give you a big but. He's cribbing from a lot of other philosophers and a lot of other much better books that you can get and read. Again,
I'm aware. I'm somewhat aware of that because I was actually talking a little bit about like pseudo speciation.
Yeah.
And people came in when I was talking about that with regard to hate speech, and they're like, "Oh, way to plagiarize On Killing," and I'm like, what the fuck is On Killing?
yeah it's weird, and that's the thing. Like you might not have encountered it if it wasn't for that conversation, because that book is part of the broader vet culture industry that I was talking about a minute ago, where it's specifically marketed to us. And if you've listened to me on Brenton's channel before, if you've listened to my podcast before, I have a big hate on for the culture industry, because it keeps replicating itself in whatever manner is profitable. And there is an entire cottage industry of vet and active army content right now. And some of it's very good. There's a guy called Angry Cops, very funny guy. He's to the right of me, but he's objectively funny and he gets the culture. There's a guy named Yusha Thomas, who is actually my drill sergeant, who is hilarious. but for every one of those, there's like 5 or 6 bro vet channels that think they're a sheepdog, that think they're tough, that think that appeal to a certain audience. And as they find that audience that they have to appeal to, they adjust the vet culture to that audience to maintain profitability. And I think that's one of the reasons that the right's been able to fetishize the U.S. military so much. And the funny thing is that it's not really borne out in the actual data when you look at what the Army's makeup is. Because I'm looking at right now a poll that's from themilitarytimes.com, where they took a favorability thing for Donald Trump. And if you just pay attention to vet media and the T-shirt companies and mainstream news where they just have the bro vets on, you would think that it would be like 80% in favor of Donald Trump. But the poll breaks down as very unfavorable, 45.1%, unfavorable, 4.8%, neutral, 8.5%. I don't know how you're neutral. It's probably just people who don't care.
They're just not paying any attention.
Yeah. Which, when you're working 12, 15, 18-hour days sometimes, when you're going away for like 30 days at a time, when you're getting deployed for like 10, 12, 15 months, I can understand why you don't care about politics. So that's understandable. Favorable is 17.3%, and very favorable is only 24.3%. So only about a quarter of the active military is very favorable towards the president. And I wonder, I know why, but I wonder why we don't hear more about that. And the other thing is that officers are much more predisposed to be unfavorable towards Donald Trump than enlisted, because officers are all college educated.
Absolutely. And it can sometimes take some education to see through this bullshit. Like Donald Trump, it always fascinates me. Like when you see like the right's version with like God Emperor Trump, where they project all of these, like all of their virtues onto this like fat slovenly sack of crap.
Who's objectively a coward, because
he's a coward. He's got holes in his brain. He referred to like sleeping around in like the New York City clubs as his Vietnam.
Yeah, and he and the other weird thing is that, I'm sorry, I have to plug this thing in. I'm sorry about the noise, but he not only did he dodge the Vietnam War, but he's constantly hypercritical of actual U.S. military heroes. Secretary of Defense Mattis, who you probably are not a big fan of. As an enlisted guy, I was a huge fan of Secretary Mattis. He had
a very good nickname, Mad Dog.
Yeah, Mad
Everybody
Dog.
wants to be called Mad Dog.
He hated that with like a
Oh,
passion.
really?
Yeah, he's like, I just like being called Jim.
Okay, Mad Dog.
Yeah, I got 2 medals from him actually. While I was in the service. Towards the end, actually, he signed my end of career award. Great guy.
Well, that's cool. So you've got a good opinion of Mattis overall, and he quit, if I'm not mistaken. So I've got a better opinion of him than before he quit.
Yeah, exactly. And he was a policy guy, and he was extraordinarily frustrated because Donald Trump has no idea what he's doing with the U.S. military, and that fetishization makes people think that he does, because people's reference for being tough is saying the tough guy words. People's reference for tough is like, I don't even know, man. It's just so weird because he's so not tough, but they do project that God Emperor Trump thing. They draw him with like 6-packs and muscles, like he's beating up people.
Yeah, which Donald Trump never. Yeah, it's really funny actually when you mess with that image of people. I remember the one time like I really pissed a bunch of tankies off was when I declared that I would win in a fist fight with Stalin.
Well, he's got one withered arm, so yeah, you probably
exactly. I was like, well, okay, so Stalin was like 5'4". He was the size of Tom Cruise. I'm 6'2". Yeah. He was like 150 pounds or something in that range. He had a single withered arm, which would mean like, he could not protect his left side, and also he's dead and I'm alive. So
that kind of gives you an unfair advantage. So
I'm totally winning a fist fight, and I guess that means in your weird "my dad can beat up your dad" power fantasies, it means you owe your allegiance to me.
Yeah, I guess. Well, you're not taking into account that Stalin would have you shot before the fight.
He definitely would. Though, no, you know, Stalin also would have. If you were in his inner circle, nobody partied like Joseph Stalin.
No, they didn't.
And at one time, he actually made his. He had this in common with Lyndon B. Johnson, except he had a good excuse because it was during the war. During war times, he at least once made the soldiers guarding him watch him take a shit in the middle of the road because he didn't want to go off in case there was a landmine.
Jesus.
Yeah, and Lyndon B. Johnson would frequently, like, when you were trying to talk to him because he was like the president, he would make you like follow him into the bathroom and either continue the meeting while he's like dropping a deuce, or he'd just whip his dick out in front of you, which was supposedly very large, and just like piss like right in front of you, like, yeah, let's continue. You gotta say at least power move.
Power move, you know,
completely insane, but power move.
I might surprise you when I say this, but I'm actually legislatively, I'm a big fan of Lyndon B. Johnson in terms of American politics, and I think what you're talking about now is a great way to counteract this, in that the American left, led by the Democratic Party, such as it is, really isn't very tough either.
No, the left is oh God, you guys are the worst.
And I think this milquetoast hashtag resistance movement that we have now, it's never going to be effective because they're not actually tough. They're not actually fighting. And I mean, can you imagine, for instance, if when Obama was trying to pass a public option for healthcare, which he caved on.
Yeah. But
can you imagine if he had taken the Blue Dog Democrats into the White House and made them watch him take a shit?
It would have been, that would have gotten passed.
It would have gotten passed. And when we abdicate that toughness, when I like to say to people, and this is dark humor, but I like to say to people that the Democrats right now think that politics is 3-dimensional chess. We always hear that, right?
8-dimensional chess.
8-dimensional, whatever. And what it really is it's a knife fight in a dark septic tank that's filling up.
Yeah. And that's politics. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the sooner we realize that and start fighting, the sooner that we can kind of start to blow holes in this myth of right-wing toughness. The sooner we start not necessarily being not being empathetic, not abandoning empathy, but embracing the fight that we have to be in, the sooner we can start to get rid of some of these right-wing tough guy figures, and the sooner we can maybe start to win back the image of being for veterans and active duty U.S. military for the broader civilian population. Because I guarantee you, I don't know much about the shooter, but just from looking over his social media profile, just from looking at what he did, I guarantee you this guy consumed a lot of right-wing vet media. I guarantee you he consumed a lot of right-wing media in general. And he thought that it was his patriotic tough guy duty to drive that car into that crowd and to murder that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he was, and if he was actually tough, he would have just been like, yes, I murdered him. Take me to jail. He wouldn't have lied about the guy drawing on him. He wouldn't have, he wouldn't have lied about his car getting attacked. Like, and we see this, there's video of this. You guys can look it up. I'll link it in the description. But unequivocally, this was a murder. So like, you can see the gun is down. You can see it's not anywhere near like being raised, and you'll notice like the weasel words that is like his lawyer used was just something along the lines of like he saw him beginning to draw his gun. Of course, beginning.
Yeah.
What is beginning? What stage of is he 1 second into drawing his gun? Is he 3 seconds?
Yeah.
So like it's really disgusting. But one of the things that this is about politics that I've been trying to get across to the people on the left, that I like, to the actual Democrats and the people that have been on the left for, I don't consider the Democrats the left, but like generally
they're objectively center right, but you know, such as we have it in America at this point.
The quote unquote leftist culture who have been leftists their entire lives have never been on the right. You know, there's two big things that I've noticed. One of which is I remember like all of these people when Nancy Pelosi like did that little side clap for Donald Trump. There were so many people, and I'm not even talking about like freaking kids. I'm talking like freaking people who were my professors in college. Like with the yes queen and like, oh, this is so much power being displayed here. And I'm just like, they're laughing at you.
Yeah, they are.
the cues, the ways that the Democrats project power and competence reads to people on the right as total utter weakness.
Yeah.
And like no one's going to trust you. And that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump has done well. He is well versed in acting like he is powerful and tough. Because he's got sort of that kind of Queen's accent. He, in a very specific way that he wears his suit, he looks like if you get him at just the right angle, he looks like he's got like a jutting jawline. But I mean, you seriously, like, look at all of these freaking far right fascist losers who have taken over countries in the past. You've got Benito Mussolini, who looked like freaking Aleister Crowley's like basic cousin. or like Marlon Brando if the poor guy let himself go. Francisco Franco looked like a doofy school teacher. Freaking Hitler, and he looked like Charlie Chaplin.
And you know, it's
These
getting
are
worse.
Not alphas.
It's getting
mega weirdos.
It's getting worse too, because and God forbid I'm actually going to say something good about a fascist, kind of backhanded compliment. At least Benito Mussolini and Hitler were both combat veterans.
Yeah. Yeah,
but
Trump, is objectively a coward.
Yeah, and that's kind of a weird thing that I'm seeing in vet culture is that Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vidman. Are you familiar with him?
Oh,
he was the Ukraine whistleblower.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, Purple Heart, combat infantry badge. So that dude saw some combat in the war, and then the right wing vet bros in their grunt style shirts, drinking their Black Rifle Coffee Company coffee, which I actually like. I've got some of the AK blend in my house right now, so I can't talk too much about that. But they're siding with a failed game show host who dodged the draft and speaks negatively about veterans all the time over an objective American war hero again.
Yep.
And I think part of that, as we're talking about this, is that weakness that the quote unquote new left in America kind of projects, this milquetoast resistance kind of thing. Because, you know, if you're an active soldier and you have to be tough, you're told to be tough all the time. Your job is to be tough. Your job is to be a warrior. And you see these people who are doing this little side clap or just tearing up the speech, and that's their big resistance moment. Like, you're not going to be. Oh, did I lose you? I lost you for a second.
You're still on.
Oh, okay. You're not gonna be down for that.
No, you're really not.
And it showed too, because in 2016, U.S. service members actually voted at an almost record low rate.
Mm-hmm.
In the polls.
Yeah. And I can see a number of good reasons why they would vote. To be fair, also, a lot of people voted at a record low rate in 2016.
They did. And it's also frustrating to vote as a soldier because a bunch of my votes were straight up not counted while I was in the military because I had to vote absentee. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and like people in America just do not understand voting like in general. No. We can do a big thing on it, but one of the things that I've also found is it's also an issue of authoritarianism and hero worship.
Yeah.
In the sense that, so on the left, you know, as you've seen, there's the whole cancel culture thing, and anybody who steps even a little ways out of line and says even slightly the wrong thing, suddenly it's this dog pile to tear them down, this kind of crabs in the barrel idea, which, you know, whereas on the right, like there's a reason why there's like a career in it for right-wing media personalities, because on the right, if you impress them, they throw money and praise and acclaim at you like it's going out of style. On the left, you step up and try to do something, and they're like, "Who told you to do that?" You know, and so like one of the things that I really noticed about this, and I had a conversation with Kay Fellows, who bills herself as a pro-life feminist, because she had been the moderator for one of my more recent debates. And I was like, oh, this might be an interesting person to talk to. I had her on my channel, and we talked about like the issue of like on the left of leftist creators getting torn down by the left themselves. And what she said is that the right has the opposite problem. Whereas as soon as someone becomes prominent on the right, essentially they can do no wrong. They are like lionized, and as long it's like, oh, this is one of my heroes, and I will back them until my dying day, no matter what. Meanwhile, you know, Donald Trump is, you know, meeting a 15-year-old girl in Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan apartment, and they're all fine with it. They're all fine with it. They're mad about Bill Clinton doing the same damn thing. Yeah. But Trump, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
And the other thing is that they're so committed to the narrative and the simple emotional releases that they get from it,
which is the core of fascism.
It is, absolutely. Read Fascism by Umberto Eco. It's probably the most accessible and one of the better works on this subject. But they're so attached to that narrative that they start to ignore the actual material and observable things that the right does to degenerate the power and the material circumstances of America. Coming from a military perspective, right now France and Germany are concluding a separate alliance from NATO because they can't rely on America under Donald Trump.
Yep.
The withdrawal from the Iran deal, it was met with like acclaim from right-wing vet bros and from the right-wing media, and even a lot of quote-unquote left-wing media in America. Objectively, that was a terrible thing. We had brought Iran into an international order, subjugated their ability to make a nuclear weapon. I mean, you know, geopolitics aside and ideological goals aside, that was a brilliant piece of diplomacy. Now, Iran can legally, theoretically make a nuke. They don't want to. They don't want to because of other great power politics in that region. And they're concluding a military alliance with China right now. So we've gotten significantly weaker under the Trump administration in the Middle East and in a key strategic area. But because of this fetishization of toughness and this fetishization of doing it on our own that we get a lot of people in the military whose lives are objectively in more danger now.
Well, what was it? Donald Trump was aware that Vladimir Putin was putting bounties on the deaths of American soldiers. Yeah, he was aware of it and did nothing.
It's good to know that I was worth $100,000. That was kind of a bit of an ego boost. But
it's interesting. You were worth more dead to Vladimir Putin than you are alive to Donald Trump.
Yeah, significantly. He probably, if he knew about me, he probably really would hate me and say negative things about me, even though I have a few things over him in that I have a National Defense Service Medal for joining an army during a war. But
thank you for your service, by the way.
Oh, thank you for your tax money, brother. But and that's a kind of an element of
joke's on you. I don't make enough money to pay taxes.
You pay sales tax. That probably goes into my pocket.
Yeah, I do.
But you know that's a thing that I think might have happened to this shooter, is that fetishization of toughness made him really want to strike back against these Antifa hordes that are trying to take over his state. I guarantee you, I haven't seen the pass radius from Fort Hood where he was stationed, but I guarantee you he was not supposed to be at that protest. I guarantee you there was a standing order for those troops not to go to protests. But because of that fetishization of toughness, because of maybe some residual anti-communism that exists in the U.S. military from the Cold War, he went there and he killed a man.
Yep.
And
he tried to claim that he was doing a ride share and he was looking for something. He didn't know the protest was there, but like the street had been shut.
There's no way you missed that.
No. And you don't, even if he had missed it, he would have known there was a protest. Like in the video, you see protesters with flags walking across the street and he still drives into it, running a red light.
Exactly. And so he purposely murdered a guy. And the other thing is that he'll probably be fetishized by certain people on the far right. I don't think the mainstream right is going to fetishize this particular guy. But he'll be fetishized by people on the far right as some sort of war hero. And I got to look at his dress uniform, which I'll link under this in the description, and I'm pretty sure Brenton will too. And if you look at his dress uniform, another thing about being disconnected from the military civilians is that they don't know what the cool little jewelry that we get on our uniforms mean. I'd noticed that he had
pieces of flair.
Our pieces of flair, man. Yeah. If you look at if you're listening to this, open up a new tab and look up U.S. Army Class B uniform. It totally looks like a Rent-A-Cop or like a TGI Fridays uniform. I hated that uniform. But if you look at his uniform, I didn't see a combat stripe on his sleeve. I saw an Afghan campaign medal, and then I saw a NATO medal, Global War on Terrorism service medal, National Defense Service ribbon, and a Army Service ribbon. Those are all just basically participation awards. It means that he showed up in Afghanistan for a few days and he joined the army during a war. He had no achievement medals. He had no end of tour award for his time in Afghanistan, which means he wasn't there for very long. He had no combat stripes, so that means he wasn't there for very long. He had an infantry blue cordon, so that means he was an infantryman, but he had no combat infantryman badge, so he never saw direct combat. And he had no expert infantryman badge, so he wasn't a particularly high-speed infantryman. High speed in the vet and military world means like very good. But so this guy wasn't a war hero. This guy wasn't probably a particularly good soldier. And the people in his unit, and if you are in his unit and you're listening to this, or if you knew this guy and you're listening to this, please feel free to correct me. I'm Mustache Bob 2 at Twitter, and you'll see the link to my podcast if you're on Brenton's channel. But I guarantee you that the vast majority of people he served with do not reflect his views. And what I'm worried about is that you're going to see stuff like this, and we're going to forget that Garret Foster was also a service member, and we're going to forget about the wall of vets, and we're just going to remember this awful subhuman shooter who goes and murders somebody. And I'm worried that we're going to see that right-wing vet culture start to justify this. I'm worried that we're going to see more and more fetishization of toughness and the military by the right without actually doing things that benefit the military and our strategic position and therefore soldiers. And that's something that I really wonder how we can fix in this country. And I wonder how that the subculture that I'm in can kind of reach out to a subculture that's materially and emotionally disconnected from us from 20 years of war. It's a tough question.
It definitely is a tough question, and it's incredibly depressing to hear about this. And you're right, because the press was immediately running with this, and they're like, "Oh, he's a decorated soldier," and all this stuff. So it's good to hear that no, they're completely mistaken. They were just fooled by the uniform. I definitely think that Americans should not be as disconnected from our military as we are. We especially when this wars continue as they have, and the fact that these industries are popping up specifically for vets, it's because they feel isolated and they're removed from the regular culture that we have, so they have to create their own subcultures, and to a certain extent that's going to happen no matter what. But there's whenever people come out of step with the rest of humanity, it can become a very dangerous situation. That's coming from me, Mr. Lifelong individualist weirdo. but you don't want to fall out of step with the rest of humanity. We are social creatures, and it's very important for us to understand each other so that we can understand ourselves. And when people get isolated, that's when, they may fall into situations like this where they go out and they kill someone.
Yeah, there's an excellent book, and it's a fiction book, but it was written by a Vietnam War vet. It's called The Forever War. Are you familiar with that one?
I've heard about it. I think Robert Evans has pushed it on his Behind the Bastards podcast a couple of times.
Yeah, I really felt that, because I'll summarize real quick. The book is about a guy who gets drafted for a war in space in the future. There's a very funny moment at the beginning where his drill instructor is a space marine, and he's still carrying an M1911A1 handgun, which that thing's going to go to space. But he's deployed for like 4 months in his time, but because of relativity, like 20 years passes. And he keeps getting deployed over and over and over again until he's so disconnected from the culture that he's the last straight guy in his unit, because everyone else is genetically engineered clones and they're all gay.
Genetically engineered clones.
Yeah, he's sitting at this bar towards the end of the book, and he's just trying to have a quiet drink, and he's hearing his like soldiers go like, "Look at that weirdo, he likes girls," and like everything he knew about a culture is gone. And I really felt that, because I read that book after I got back from 10 and a half months in Afghanistan, and I had missed like a year of popular culture. I was completely like out of step with what was going on in America. And you get that in the military, because look, even if you don't deploy for a long time, you're going to be working those long days that I was talking about. You're going to be doing 30-day field problems, like 30-day little exercises every couple months. You're going to go to places called the National Training Center and the Joint Readiness, JRTC, I forget what that actually stands for. You're going to be going to the deserts of California.
Reserve Officer Training Camp?
No, it's Joint Readiness Training Center. There it goes. It's if you've ever seen the movie Tigerland, it's in God's nowhere.
Oh, I thought you meant like JROTC.
No. JRTC is built on Fort Polk, which is one of the worst bases that we have. And it's designed for you to go fight a fake war in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be going there for a couple months at a time. You're going to be hanging out with the people that you work with, and pretty much nobody else, because you're going to be living on a base. And our military guys get isolated because of that. And I think reaching out to people that you know in the military and talking to them is a great way to keep that from happening. Reaching out to people that you know who are deployed, maybe, and like just talk to them, write them a letter or something. That can kind of help that from happening. But
so that they don't see a Sargon of Akkad video and freak out.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys might not know this, but that happened to me in 2014, because I thought like, oh my God, are they burning books on college campuses? And I wound up calling a good friend of mine in the States, and I asked him about this, and he's like, dude, that's not happening at all. Like I'm like, are the communists taking over? Like, well, what am I going to come back to? And and it's not true. But and I'm a guy who reads like Hegel and stuff, and I was falling for that because I was so out of step with the culture. And I bet that's what happened to this shooter. And on the one hand, he's a monster for doing what he did. On the other hand, I kind of pity him a little bit, because he allowed himself to get caught up in this.
Yeah. Well, and not just that, but like he was apparently living in some really crappy housing and had a roommate and hadn't paid his rent, and it was. He was a guy like who clearly had some stunted, not just stunted ambition, but like clearly he wasn't doing well financially. Didn't have a family, wasn't married or on the way to getting married. I feel like he definitely was, not to identify too much or to project too much, but just on the scant details that I have heard about his home life, it doesn't sound like he was a guy that particularly had things together.
And the recruiting culture targets people like that, because the Army, the big green war machine, is desperate for recruits right now. Last year they lowered the recruitment quota, and it's not because they don't need as many soldiers, it's because they knew they weren't going to get as many recruits. And they target people like that. I talked last week on our podcast about the Twitch channel. I'm banned from the Army's Twitch channel, actually, because
you were trolling.
Well, they have a text filter that prevents you from asking about war crimes. So I asked the guy about schmorschmimes, and now I'm permanently banned.
Schmorschmimes.
Schmorschmimes, yeah, do it. If you have children and you're listening to this, and you're worried about them enlisting, get on their Twitch and ask the guy about schmorschmimes, so they can't get on.
They'll never be able to enlist. That's a great idea. Well,
yeah.
It was interesting too when you talk about that recruitment, because my dad, who was a flight surgeon, he once at one point told me that he had to send a guy home because the guy had been recruited and he clearly was not all there and had kind of almost a childlike mind, and said that his recruiter had told him that if he joined the military, he'd get to go camping every day.
Well, I mean, he's not technically wrong.
Yeah, it's not entirely a lie.
Recruiters are like the devil, man. They lie with like detail. They lie with the truth. It's really clever. But the thing about that is it's funny because when I came in a little late to the Army, I was like 24 when I enlisted, and I had lived a little bit, and I saw the kids coming in, and a lot of them thought they were going to do some like Call of Duty stuff. When you're recruited, they send you to a place called a MEPS, which is just a in-processing center for every branch. And so we had Marines, Navy, Air Force, and Army. And I made the best choice and joined the Army. But actually, the best choice is the Air Force. If my friend Michael is listening to this, I'm lying right now. But otherwise, yes, join the Air Force. But I saw these kids who were like, a buck 15, 18 years old, and they thought they were going to be Marine Special Forces, and they were doing pull-ups and stuff. And it's just like they had completely like internalized this Call of Duty narrative that they were going to be unstoppable badasses if they joined the military. And a lot of people that I knew who joined infantry as their job were kind of like that at first. And, you get disabused of that notion real fast. But at the same time, that's the people that we're targeting for recruitment. That's always been a thing too. I mean, the Romans would go to like the farms and tell kids that they were going to be, badass legionaries to get them to join. The British would do it famously.
The guy who founded, what was it, the magazine that probably got everybody killed, Soldier of Fortune magazine.
Oh God.
When he joined, he was told basically that he'd be James Bond.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure he never saw combat.
Most people don't see direct combat. That's the other thing. And that's kind of disappointing because you have this masculine power fantasy if you're a dude and you're coming in. And, the majority of the Army is male. Females are stepping up and joining at a higher rate than they used to. Go girls. Female drone pilots, hashtag. But on that note, it is worth noting real quick that soldiers don't choose wars, and that if you have a problem with the war, you have a problem with policymakers.
Yeah, not the soldiers themselves.
Yeah.
So I actually had a question for you. So because you mentioned like sort of military rank and how that works. Have you read Homage to Catalonia?
No, I haven't actually.
I highly recommend you read it because I was just talking about this on my stream with Armin because we were talking about anarchism and like how it could work and how it obviously, and you have to go and disabuse people of all of the bad stereotypes that they've. I imagine it must be like talking to an anti-war person who doesn't know anything about the military. Yeah. When you meet a guy who wants to criticize anarchism who doesn't know anything about anarchism. But George Orwell both was a police officer in British colonized Burma. And then he left that and joined a left Marxist unit, the POOM, that ran on like a more anarchistic style, like anti-authoritarian military unit. And he actually talked about the training and the recruits, and he compares it to the process of being trained as a police officer and how like raw recruits are. And he was very complimentary of revolutionary discipline. And how the anarchist and the left Marxist units were held together not by violence or like a really strict command structure, but by revolutionary consciousness. So I would love to get your view on that as a soldier. And also, honestly, Homage to Catalonia it's a great book. So.
I'll give that a shot. I'll order it from Papa Bezos after we're done here tonight.
Yeah.
But that you did touch on something interesting there because militaries almost universally have very hierarchical structures by necessity now, because we build our military on a Western Clausewitz model, and we build our military to fight and win wars for a very specific reason. And that kind of does lend itself a little bit to conservative thinking. And it's also a meritocracy culture. Theoretically, that doesn't always happen. You're supposed to advance in rank based on your ability to do the job. You're supposed to become an NCO based on your ability to lead soldiers. You're supposed to become an officer based on your ability to lead soldiers and NCOs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Increased responsibility, increased rank. And that also kind of lends itself to conservative American thinking, because as you're disattached from the actual economy that we're going through, this neoliberal nightmare, you're thinking like, well, I earned this, I'm advancing, so the system broadly must work. But you're in a very hierarchical, very isolated military structure. And I think that is one of the things that lends veterans and soldiers to being recruits for far-right causes. Did you hear about this guy that got recruited by the Nazi cult in Britain?
No, that could be a lot of people. So
no, I mean it's a literal Nazi satanic cult. It's like the Order of 8 Angels or something.
Oh God, freaking dweebs!
Yeah, exactly. And he got recruited by these guys on online forums. He was a soldier, and his unit was going to Europe for a rotation. And what happened was he got recruited by these Nazi cultists, which it sounds like something out of Wolfenstein. But he was going to stage a jihadi-style attack on U.S. Army soldiers to promote a race war.
Oh my! Because that would promote a race war.
and they went down his social media, and he goes down the standard alt-right pipeline, the Ben Shapiro's and the Crowders and that. And I think that hierarchical ideology lent him very well to be being recruited by these far-right ideas. And I think that this shooter here, we're probably going to find out the same thing about him. Yeah. And I think that defense of hierarchy and the defense of like a command structure in society is something that you can run into very easily as a soldier or airman or sailor or whatever. Or Marine.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing with hierarchy because, like, and this is speaking as somebody I've been a manager. I've been at the top of a hierarchy before, and I was a damn good manager, and the people that worked for me really loved me. Well, the ones that stayed, or at least that's what they told me.
You don't have a choice as a soldier. That's the thing. Because, you get your command structure, and that's it. Like you can't quit. Can't really request a transfer very easily. You're stuck with that leadership.
Sure. Yeah. But I've been in a lot of ways. I've been a leader in a lot of situations. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot of people that have anxiety about authority. Yeah. And so what they do is they throw themselves at authority. And it's like, if I can humble myself enough, if I can be enough on this person's side, the authority is going to be okay with me and I will prosper. It's like the Dwight Schrute system. And I think a lot of the times you get that out of like fascists and serial killers and like, or what was it? Because it was one of the major serial killers, I think it was Ed Kemper, like loved cops.
Yeah, he recorded a bunch of audiobooks. I actually listened to one of his audiobooks.
Does he sound like a narwhal?
No, he has a very deep voice because he's like 7 feet tall.
If you watch Mindhunter, there's a guy who plays Ed Kemper on there. Well, that's great.
That's how I found out about that without realizing that I had listened to his audiobooks before I watched that show.
Oh yeah. Well, so does he sound like in the audiobooks? Does he sound like the actor?
Yeah, he sounds a lot like that.
Okay,
guy.
So he does. So there's another podcast, I think it's called My Favorite Murder, that my wife loves because women in particular love true crime, and they talk about how he sounds like like they imagine a cartoon narwhal would sound.
Yeah. There's a cheapening of life that you get when you get military training too, because there's a really weird thing that they realized around the Vietnam era, that most people when they fired their rifle for the first time would purposely shoot high because they didn't want to hit somebody. Because everything in your social conditioning is to keep you from killing somebody, theoretically.
Yeah.
And
they have to go and reverse that.
they do it really well, and they do it in 10 weeks. And it's an amazing thing because you get to your second phase of Army basic training, and then you start learning how to shoot your gun. And you get accustomed to shooting at a man-shaped silhouette, and you get accustomed to watching it fall over. And you start getting positive reinforcement for hitting the target. And they've noticed that since they've implemented this kind of training since like the 80s, that in Desert Storm and in the War on Terror, almost nobody shoots high. Almost everybody shoots to kill now.
That's both encouraging and depressing.
It is at the same time. And, you know, it's efficient for fighting wars, which is what the military is for. At the same time, it engenders kind of like a gallows humor and like a very dark outlook on the value of human life in people that get that training. And you get exposed to other things. You get exposed to like images of human bodies being torn apart. You get exposed to training aids that simulate people being shot. You get exposed to actually seeing it if you deploy. You're going to see some messed up stuff if you deploy. You're going to see some funny things too. I actually actually did have to watch a guy molest an animal one time overseas, which was really disturbing. And I was like,
you had to watch it. What, like? As an official event?
No, I was on guard, and this dude, not in Afghanistan, I was on guard, and this dude was going at it with an animal, and I'm like, can I shoot this guy? And they're like, no, you can't shoot him. I'm like, well, I guess I'm sitting here. I can't stop watching the sector that I'm watching. I guess I gotta watch.
I just gotta watch this guy fuck a goat.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you know, people pay a lot of money to see that in Tijuana. So
they do, man. You know, I had to pay. I mean, I wouldn't know anything about that. You know.
Okay, so on the goat fucking, are there any pluggables you've got? I think at this point.
There's one thing I wanted to note that we've been talking about all this stuff about the negativity of it, and I want to say that this shooter and the negative aspects of the military culture that we're talking about doesn't represent the majority of veterans, doesn't represent the majority of soldiers. There were heroes in Portland and in many other cities now that are forming walls of vets between protesters and the stormtroopers. There are many left-wing veterans. The majority of the military seems to have a negative opinion of Trump. Don't get fooled by the fetishization of toughness. Don't get fooled by the bro-vet props that the right brings out. Don't get fooled by that image. Realize that soldiers and veterans are Americans and they have diverse political opinions, and that they're not all this murderer. And that's something that I wanted to really hammer home at the end of this. And my pluggables are, I'm the 5x5 podcast, which I'm sure Brenton's going to link at the bottom of this. I'll have this audio up too. I'll also link Brenton's YouTube channel. I'm Mustache Bob 2, numeral 2 at Twitter. Join me for some philosophical conversations or talk to me about the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And my name is Brenton Lengel. You can find me at my website, brentonlengel.com. Search me on YouTube. I'm very close to I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. I'm up over 800, so you can help me hit that hopefully by the end of the month. And I'm the author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. Second issue is coming out very soon, which I'm really excited about. We got a new editor on it, and we also got a new production guy via Scout Comics, so it's going to look a lot more professional even than the first one. So I'm stoked about that. And yeah, I would say I think you told people you were going to tell them a joke before the end of this. So it was a beautiful ending speech, but let's hear your joke.
Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can't find one, because I think that I gotta top that. I gotta top that. Oh, okay. Hey, Brenton, how do you weigh a millennial?
How do you weigh a millennial?
In Instagrams.
I hate you. I should add on that, just the intellectual thing is that puns. Yeah. Puns before the Enlightenment reviewed as the highest of high art. And then we all decided that because they weren't rational, they were the worst art. But I kind of agree with it. That was awful.
That was awful.
Yourself.
I'll go chop off my pinky finger.
Okay. Well, this has been great, and I will see you guys soon. Everybody watching this, please go and yell at Rationality Rules and tell him to debate me. Debate me, bro. Because I'm trying to set something up with him, but I think he's kind of busy at the moment. So
I got to get into that kind of thing too, man.
Oh, well, dude, let me know, and I'll see if I can set one up with you and James, because you did great in the last debate. I'm sure he'd love to have you back on. Just think up a topic.
Outstanding.
All right. I'll catch you later.
All right. Let me see if I can't do this thing.